My dad used to say, we must learn nonviolence or we may face non-existence. We've elected President Trump again. The question is, how do we navigate incivility?
Many people of color are concerned. How should they navigate that fear?
I think it's a legitimate emotion. We got to keep working on a mission. I must remind people, Dad wasn't killed because he was talking about sitting in front of a bus. He was killed because he was talking about economic empowerment. My father talked in dialogue with every person who was president and vice president. President Eisenhower and Nixon were in office. When President Kennedy and Johnson were in office. When President Johnson and Vice President Humphrey. And one of the things that is being shown by the tragedy in California, some are sending money, some are sending clothes, because that's who Americans are.
Your father said, I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know that we as a people will get to the promised land. Are we there yet?
Absolutely not. I don't mean to be so blunt, but no.
That is the MLK Memorial in Washington, D.C. This is Studio 57, and I'm speaking to you on Donald Trump's Inauguration Day. But here's what's interesting. Today is also the federal holiday honoring Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and we had the opportunity to speak with his son, Martin Luther King III, about this interesting coincidence and, more importantly, what it means for Americans who both do and do not support Donald Trump. We were only able to show you a portion of it on the show that we just did on CBS News 24/7, but right now you get to see the extended version of my conversation with MLK III. It's my pleasure now to bring in Martin Luther King III. He's a human rights activist and the son, of course, of Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King. Thanks for being with us today. You know, Donald Trump's inauguration coincides with the national holiday to honor your father. What does that coincidence, though, mean for the identity of America in 2025 and beyond?
Well, every so often, inaugurations have fallen on the third Monday of the, which is always the King holiday. In this particular year, the comparing and contrasting is from an image standpoint. What is it that our nation wants to create? We've elected President Trump again, and the question is, how do we navigate incivility? Because historically there has not been civility. Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King went against what society was attempting to do initially and helped create the climate so that we could move forward in a constructive way. I don't think we can continue to move forward in a destructive way, because we need each other. And one of the things that is being shown by the tragedy in California, how people have lost everything because of natural disasters like a fire. And we can't resolve those issues until we are engaged. And I think many Americans are engaged in a wonderful way. Some are sending money, some are sending clothes, whatever people need, because it's almost like starting your life over. It's been a huge interruption. And I believe even as it relates to governing, we need people to respond in that same way, because that's who Americans are. And that's, you know, I'm sure my father would want to see us engage in a positive way, engage in an uplifting way, engage in a supportive way. We've got to be a more unified nation so that we reflect what our name is, which is the United States of America.
Yeah, your father maintained his civility in the face of so much outright racist hate and animosity. And when we speak about California, we know that Altadena, one community wiped off the map, also erased a lot of black wealth. Let's drill down on how we get to being more civil and engaging, because black Americans overwhelmingly voted for Kamala Harris, but you're urging them to pay close attention, to not ignore Donald Trump or the MAGA right. Why is that?
Well, number one, we can never ignore. In fact, my father talked and dialogued with every person who was president and vice president during his life. When President Eisenhower and Nixon were in office, he dialogued with them. When President Kennedy and Johnson were in office, he dialogued. When President Johnson and Vice President Humphrey, he dialogued. My point is, we have to stay engaged in conversation to talk about a direction that that our nation should go, a direction that is in the interest of all Americans, not one particular group. And I just think civility is temporarily lost, and I would like to see civility brought back to the political discourse. You can't require that unless you hold elected officials accountable. And holding them accountable is a two-way street, meaning that, again, there must be engagement. And I think that people are feeling are feeling down or feeling dejected or feeling lost. I don't think we have the luxury to believe that. Certainly you can feel it emotionally, but you got to move past that and say, look, we got to keep working on a mission of justice, of peace, of righteousness. My dad used to say, we must learn nonviolence or we may face non-existence. The climate for non-existence, we don't even need to delve down that hole. We must lift up. It really is about lifting up, creating a consciousness, creating a dignity and respect and a sensitivity. That's how we need to engage with people, even if we don't agree. And my dad showed us that, because people didn't always agree with him. But you had to engage in dignity and respect.
Well, to your point, many Trump supporters are celebrating his return to the White House, while many Black Americans and people of color in general are concerned, not just about the policies that Trump may bring and how it may impact them, but how emboldened his supporters may be, just in general life. How should they navigate that fear? Should they be fearful?
I think it's a legitimate emotion to have fear. But once you get beyond your fear and maybe trepidation, you gotta move forward and not allow. It's like, we don't have the luxury of stopping. I have to think about our ancestors. And the reality is, what my father and his team were doing, it didn't happen until it happened. In other words, it looked impossible. It may look impossible to some, but at the end of the day, if you stay engaged, progress is made. I mean, the fact of America is, when we look at it, we've elected an African-American president. We elected an African-American vice president, a woman, Indian and Asian. We have an African-American woman on the Supreme Court and a Latino-American on the Supreme Court woman. So strides have been made. It seems as if some are trying to turn the clock back. The universe moves forward. We are in a scenario, the universe is not going to go backward ever. If it does, we're in big problems. Society and some elected officials are attempting to go backward. But this is a temporary state. I mean, that's what I have to keep stating. We are always in a temporary state, but we must move towards some degree of progress and not a degree of holding people back and excluding people. We have to include everyone to become the best America that we can become.
Before he was assassinated, some 57 years ago now in Memphis, your father said, quote, "I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know that we as a people will get to the promised land." Are we there yet?
Absolutely not. I don't mean to be so blunt, but no, we are not even in the vicinity yet. Now, he was not just talking about black people, by the way, but if we just talk about black people, the income and inequality, the wealth gap. White families have probably close to $300,000 in wealth. Black families is somewhere around $35,000, maybe even less. We got to close that gap. We should have done that by now. Back in his era, we had no known black billionaires. Now we have a minimum of 12. So again, progress has been made, But how do we increase that? How do we address the issues of economic inequality? And I must remind people, Dad wasn't killed because he was talking about sitting in a restaurant eating what we wanted to eat, or sitting in the front of a bus. He was killed because he was talking about economic empowerment for more people. And when you talk about a radical redistribution of wealth, which is something that those at the time knew and understood and felt, because he's talking this way, he has to be removed. Unfortunately, that is still needed today, a redistribution of some wealth, because there's such a huge disparity. And some may say, well, people need to have the free market, which is true. But by the same token, how do we include? I mean, we live I'm in this nation, and in my city and in every city in America, we have thousands of homeless people. In a nation with a $23 to a $25 trillion economy, something is wrong with that. And the answer is not just giving a man a fish. That may be a part of the answer. But when we teach people to fish, they can feed themselves and their families for a lifetime. We've got to change the climate.
Well, I know that you continue to do the work that your father began, and of course he left an imprint on the country and the world, which will never change. Martin Luther King III, we really appreciate you spending some time with us today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
You know, I really enjoyed having that conversation with MLK III at a time like this. Share with me your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this chat, you'll like what we have coming up for you next.